So this was a safety update for the DESTINY-Breast03 study. The efficacy of that study was actually presented previously and led to the expanded approval for trastuzumab deruxtecan last month in earlier line therapies. And so this was really a safety update. And so at the safety update, the treatment duration had lengthened from 6.9 months in the T-DM1 arm to 16.1 months in the T-DXd arm. So just a little bit about some safety and some extra things that we looked at, some specific adverse events. So this was a trial that was really designed to be a so-called second-line trial. It was trastuzumab deruxtecan versus T-DM1 for patients with HER2-positive breast cancers that had already seen trastuzumab and/or a taxane in the metastatic setting, or had relapsed within 6 months of seeing HER2-directed therapy in the neoadjuvant or adjuvant study. And we saw a 72% decrease in the risk of progression, so quite impressive results in the breast world that led to this expanded indication. So the first thing we looked at was really the rates of serious treatment-emergent adverse events and treatment-emergent adverse events. So for those that were grade 3 or greater, it was really quite similar between the two arms. T-DXd at about 53%, T-DM1 at about 50%. The next thing we looked at was something that was a little bit different, just overall side effects of the drugs. And we found that nausea, vomiting, and alopecia, or hair loss, was more common with T-DXd, and fatigue was pretty similar between the arms. We looked at a new kind of fancy parameter called exposure-adjusted incidence rates. And exposure-adjusted incidence rates are a standardized measure of risk per patient year, and it's commonly used to describe safety in studies where there's long-term follow-up and there may be an imbalance in follow-up between the two treatment arms. So when we looked at these exposure-adjusted incidence rates across the board, grade 3 or greater serious treatment-emergent adverse events were actually all lower for T-DXd compared to T-DM1. The one exception was a treatment-emergent adverse event that led to discontinuation. And why that was there was about 8% of patients on T-DXd that ended up needing discontinued drug due to ILD pneumonitis. So overall, drug discontinuations were 14.8% of patients with T-DXd, again with the ILD pneumonitis at 8% driving that. And then dose discontinuations for T-DM1 was 7.3%. I think this really gave us reassurance that T-DXd has a favorable risk-benefit ratio compared to T-DM1 in this new expanded setting. We found also that the time to dose reduction or time to treatment hold of the drug, which is another way we can look at safety or how patients are doing, was longer with T-DXd than T-DM1. So putting all of this together, I think it really reassured us that we have a good handle on the safety profile of trastuzumab deruxtecan. ILD pneumonitis is one thing that we've really been following, and overall T-DXd had a 10.9% rate of ILD pneumonitis, any grades, no grade 4 or grade 5 events, that means no fatal events, and grade 3 events are now at still less than 1% at 0.8. So really kind of showed us that for the efficacy and how much better patients are doing on T-DXd, that this really makes quite a bit of sense. The one thing we have to stay on top of for these patients is nausea and vomiting. Throughout the DESTINY-Breast03 trial, there were no mandated antiemetics or nausea medications for patients, but now, subsequently, we do know that T-DXd is moderately emetogenic, and it is part of the label to start antiemetics up front for patients.